NBA draft prospect's worst nightmare just came.
Damn, worst nightmare? That's crazy. Ace Bailey's worst nightmare came true. Dang, what's the worst that can ever happen to a human being here? Let's see.
True. Heading into the NBA draft, Ace Bailey was hands down the most polarizing prospect in the entire draft.
Yeah.
He refused to work out for some teams and openly stated he didn't want to go to some cities, and even declared that if a team wanted him, they'd have to trade up to the 3rd spot and select.
He never said that. This is his agent implying that. Okay, so most of these players here, because they're like really bad generally, when it comes to speaking, I've heard enough NBA podcasters talk to the point where they're not really good at speaking or talking or eloquating their like opinions. And so this could be coming in from the Ace Bailey camp. However, though, a big part of it though is coming from his agents. And we know the stories that his agent and like the inner circle he's with actually is very controlling of him. But apparently this is his worst nightmare.
However, none of that ended up happening.
None of that ended up happening. Let's do that again.
None of that ended up happening.
He has to give that. What's up with these like shorts YouTubers and or TikTokers where like whenever they do a however, for some reason they gotta give a shitty like shit grinning voice.
None of that ended up happening.
None of that ended up happening. Let's hear it again.
Up to the 3rd spot and select him. However, none of that ended up happening.
Oh, he's so proud of himself when he freaking did it. Actually, dude, I hate it. I hate it. It's very messy, spiky hair he's got over here, actually. What is going on? This is kind of a mess here. But what happened to Ace Bailey, all right, then, since none of that ended up happening?
Bailey slipped out of the top 3 and ended up being selected by the Utah Jazz with the 5th overall pick. The reason this is so funny is because before the draft, Ace Bailey's team told insiders that he'd prefer to go to Brooklyn, Washington, or New Orleans.
That is true.
He even said that he didn't want to go to the Utah Jazz.
That's a lie. He didn't say that. He never said that. Now, the guy refused to pick up calls and refused to do interviews and refused to do, like, workouts. But even then, like, he was invited by multiple teams. And he didn't want to, like, these teams over here, Brooklyn, Washington, Pelicans, they invited him to workouts, and he didn't accept the workouts.
He even said that he didn't want to go to the Utah Jazz.
Like, he never said he didn't want to go to the Utah Jazz. He didn't, like, that's a complete bold-faced lie. Where are you getting this information from here, the Flight Mike? However,
prefer to go to Brooklyn, Washington, or New Orleans. He even said that he didn't want to go to the Utah Jazz. In fact, after Utah drafted him, Bailey even said that he had no idea that the Utah Jazz were interested in him. However, none of that ended up happening.
Pretty much, that's it actually. That pretty much is it really. So, the Utah Jazz ended up drafting this boy here, 18 years old, whatever.
Interested in him.
Very raw talents.
Because just a few days ago, he told the media he didn't want to go to Utah.
He never did that, actually. He never did that. It was a matter of the fact that, like, Ace Bailey was just really nitpicky in terms of his agency clearly has him set up to be, like, a future face of the league kind of thing, actually. Where, like, clearly what this kid is, like since he was a 12-year-old, okay? Since he was a 12-year-old, he was always surrounded by people who was trying to go elevate him up. Plus, also, his agents was the father of another kid who didn't pan out the way he thought he did. And so he moved on to Ace Bailey, which to me is just kind of creepy.
The whole reason Bailey did this was because he wanted to go to a team that had a bright future and a city that he could become the face of. But now he's stuck in Salt Lake City with a team that has an endless rebuild. Because of this, I have no choice to say that this NBA draft prospect's worst nightmare just came true.
Wait, I don't get that. Wait, so you're saying that the reason why this is the worst nightmare that could ever happen to this kid, by the way, oh my gosh, like, can you think of that? Like, out of anything that's terrible happening in the world right now, this person's worst nightmare, which is so bad that he ended up even highlighting it, the word like nightmare. Wait. What is
that? NBA draft prospect's worst nightmare.
Nightmare with the red. You saw that? It's so bad this guy had to go text it to Red. Oh, how? How did Ace Bailey end up in the Utah Jazz? Well, so while other teams were skipping on the guy because the dude has so many red flags going his way, with him skipping practices, not doing well in interviews, and also him being kind of a black hole in offense and Rutgers, actually, Jazz decided to go take a look on him. And if you don't follow the Utah Jazz right now, because I do, because not that many people follow the Utah Jazz, they have been rebuilding, but as of like after the Cooper Flag thing, they pretty much said like, hey, we're done with this rebuilding phase. We've been rebuilding so often that we're done that. Now, are they kind of rebuilding? They're rebuilding in the sense that they currently are going with a very young nucleus of like Walter Clayton Jr., Kyle Filipkowski, Isaiah Collier, Cody Williams. They've got like they are not doing the thing where they're trading away assets in order for them to they're not tanking, all right? They're not tanking. They are rebuilding, but rebuilding in a way that makes the most sense here. If you are a young player, why would you not want to be in a rebuilding team? I'm asking the honest question. Why would you not want to be a rebuilding team where you could potentially be the face here? And one of the cool parts with the Utah Jazz here is that they have no actual identity. Like, Lauri Markkanen could be out. Like, Walker Kessler could be out as well for all we know there. Walker Kessler is a very, very, very valuable trade commodity. And honestly, that guy's been improving every year. He's still got rough around the edges in offense, but he can still work with that, though. But, like, Ace Bailey's in a good position here, if you think about it. He's in a good position where the team, if you've been catching up with Ace Bailey since arriving in Utah, actually, like the team has been trying really, really hard to try to create like a family feeling around this guy, actually. I was there for his Summer League debut game, actually. I literally live in Utah, so I admit here I am kind of biased here, but the audience and the organization, they love this kid. They really are. And if you look at the Summer League game that he was in, actually, that guy didn't play like a superstar. He was playing very, very average. So what was the expectation from his agents and from the media? Was like, oh, Ace Bailey's going to come in, he's going to be in a very, very terrible team, and he's going to average 27 points per game. Is that the like expectation of Ace Bailey here? Because truth be told, dude, I think he's in a very healthy situation where he's with players who are only a couple years older than him, and considering the fact that he is legitimately like the most athletically gifted player in that whole entire squad, actually, he will find his way. He really will. But like the big part of Ace Bailey is his adulting and his maturing and being able to surround himself with like positive voices. That is what Ace Bailey needs right now. Because truth be told, dude, in the Summer League debut game, actually, he was very average. He was very hesitant, and he's still trying to find his identity. So what would be the difference, honestly, between like him going to Utah versus him playing these other teams if the whole basis behind that is because he wants to like be in a team that's struggling? Like, let me look at here.
Or New Orleans.
So all these three teams are struggling here. Am I wrong? He wanted to go to Washington, honestly. I'll say that. But what do you get out? Washington is a rebuilding, terrible team. Brooklyn Nets, though, they're like mid to like they're the team that will be competing for the 8th seed for the longest time. All right, and the Pelicans are a disaster of a show if you actually keep up with their games here. So if you go to Brooklyn, Washington Wizards, New Orleans Pelicans, or the Utah Jazz, you're in a position of like they are rebuilding, they're not in a good spot. There's a very high chance here you're probably going to be one of the top options, and the offense will be built around you. Like these are all very similar scenarios here. Nobody really wants to go to Utah actually because they're not really good at trading like players, admittedly actually. Then, but at the same time though, like Utah's going to build the offense around this kid sooner or later here. But to say the worst nightmare ever happens here because this guy goes to Utah when they're full of a lot of young players who are trying to prove themselves here. Lauri Markkanen is on his way out. Jordan Clarkson just got out over there, actually. They have Keontae Jordan, who is very similar to Ace Bailey in the sense he's a shock trooper as well, actually. This will be a great moment for development, especially for Ace Bailey. And consider that BYU is slowly developing their program, and the University of Utah is also developing their program as well, actually, where they're going to be like front runners in terms of really competing in the next NCAA tournament. I say this is going to be a great position and great spot for Bailey here. But let's look at this. The Jazz is the right thing picking him. This isn't free agency. This is the draft. Yes, don't let 18-year-old kids try to hustle you, okay? They hire agents because they're not smart enough to be agents themselves. They can't make their own decisions. Like, I think like 70% of the NBA players end up going broke like post 40 years old. Like, don't get run over by like kids or by agents, especially by an agent who has like no track record of ever being a good agent here. I personally hate how players can force where they're not being forced. Like Steve Francis did it, but like the big difference here is that you want to sign this. Like even like for instance, like even if you're a random kid who is from like New York City, right? Like you're really good, you're a top 5 pick, and then the Cleveland Cavaliers draft you, right? Then yeah, Cleveland isn't your like preferred designation, but you're getting the most money out of that because if you're drafted high by them compared to being drafted by like the Knicks at like number like 25, you're making a lot more millions of dollars here. Also, you're competing with less people. Like overall, it's a win-win scenario here. That's why you see most rookies almost never decline their option to go and play with the team that drafts them, actually, because they're potentially losing out in millions of dollars. And considering the fact it only takes one injury to really end your career, then yeah, of course you will go take the money and you take the opportunities. So Utah has an endless rebuild. Washington and Brooklyn don't. I have more confidence in Utah's front office. Yeah, because they have Danny Ainge there. Danny Ainge, a proven GM or proven office worker here who can definitely like make things work here. The guy built the Boston Celtics to what it is actually. Now he wasn't there when they officially won the championships though, but it was because of Danny Ainge actually setting things up. Actually, he really was like, without Danny Ainge, there would be no Jason Tatum, there'd be no Jaylen Brown here. That team, there would be no Brad Stevens. Danny Ainge set all that up, and so for Danny Ainge now being Utah, because he's a BYU alum, like I think it's great opportunities. Also, they got the number one player, the number one high school player, the number one high school player in America play for BYU. It's got really good development programs here. I think this is great. I think the Utah Jazz is a good spot for Ace Bailey. Now I'd be reacting almost the same way if it was the Nets, Washington Wizards, or New Orleans Pelicans here. But to go say it is the worst nightmare,
this NBA draft prospect's worst nightmare just came true.
Just came true, actually. Shut the fuck up, dude. Nah, man, dude. That's just gnarly.